when her parents walked into the apartment and saw the brutal bruise under their daughter's eye. They said nothing. Marcus, the abuser, sat on the couch laughing like a king while Amelia trembled in terror. But then, one secret phone call from her lawyer brother Daniel changed everything. When Paula stormed in, Marcus screamed, "You're all crazy! What are you arresting me for?" The shocking truth about what happened behind closed doors will leave you speechless. Will Amelia escape this monster's grip? What dark secrets were hidden for years? The answer will blow your mind. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country you're watching the video, and also check if you're subscribed to the channel, as I share interesting life stories with you every day. Okay, let's enjoy the story. Amelia quietly opened the door. The bruise under her eye had spread into a crimson blotch on her pale skin. Her eyes, usually full of life, now seemed like two dark voids, reflecting only pain and fear. She hoped her parents wouldn't notice, but she knew it was impossible. Patricia and George stood on the threshold like two ghosts from a happier past. Her mother pressed her lips into a thin line, trying to hold back a cry of despair that threatened to burst out. Her father, usually so sturdy and self-assured, now looked gaunt and aged. His gaze darted across his daughter's face, not daring to linger on the bruise. They entered the apartment silently, as if stepping through a minefield. Each step echoed loudly in the ringing quiet. On the couch, sprawled out like the king of the world, sat Marcus, a half-empty beer bottle in his hand. Grinning, he eyed the newcomers. "Come on in, dear guests," he said deliberately loud, with mockery in his voice. Triumph gleamed in his eyes. He knew their visit was a sign of acknowledging his power over Amelia. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to sink through the floor, to vanish, just to avoid seeing those suffering faces, to escape his venomous tone. She lowered her gaze, trying to hide the tears ready to spill at any moment. Patricia, gathering her courage, went into the kitchen. George remained in the hallway, as if not daring to go further. "I'll put the water on," Patricia muttered, placing the kettle on the stove. Her hands trembled, and Amelia saw her mother discreetly wipe away tears with the back of her hand. An awkward silence settled in the kitchen. Only the kettle's bubbling and the wall clock's ticking could be heard. Amelia sat at the table, trying not to look at her parents. Marcus, leaning against the doorframe, watched the scene with obvious pleasure. He relished their helplessness, their silent condemnation. The tea was ready. Patricia poured it into cups and set them on the table. No one touched theirs. Amelia felt a lump rising in her throat. She wanted to scream, to tell them everything she endured, but fear paralyzed her. She feared him, feared the consequences, feared it would only get worse. George cleared his throat, breaking the silence. How's work?" he asked, avoiding his daughter's eyes. "Fine," Amelia replied quietly. "And Marcus, how is he?" George continued, struggling for words. "Everything's good," Amelia whispered, feeling tears well up again. Marcus snorted. "Couldn't be better," he said, smirking. Patricia shot him a scorching glare but said nothing. She knew any word could trigger a new outburst of rage. Time dragged on torturously slow. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts. Amelia felt like she was in a cage, trapped between fear and despair. She saw her parents suffering, and it caused her even greater pain. She understood their silence wasn't indifference, it was fear. They feared for her, feared for themselves. Finally, George stood up. "We should go," he said, looking at his wife. Patricia nodded, sighing with relief. They silently said goodbye to Amelia, avoiding her eyes. Patricia hugged her daughter tightly. "Hang in there, sweetie," she whispered in her ear. George just nodded silently and left the apartment. Amelia saw them to the door and watched them leave with a heavy heart. She knew their visit changed nothing. Everything would stay the same. She'd be left alone with her fear again. When the door closed behind her parents, Marcus approached Amelia and sneered. "Well, that's it. Even your parents kept quiet. What did I tell you? Keep putting up with it. No one needs you." Amelia said nothing. She just stood there, staring into emptiness. Something inside her broke. The thing that had kept her submissive crumbled. Instead of fear, she felt anger. Anger at herself, at him, at the whole world that allowed this. She locked the door and leaned against it with her back. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of fury and determination. She wouldn't stay silent anymore. She wouldn't endure it anymore. She'd break out of this cage no matter the cost. Marcus, confident in his control, reached for the remote. A click, and the television screen came to life, filling the room with the deafening noise of news. He leaned back on the couch, smugly sipping his beer, as if he'd just won a major battle. Triumph shone in his eyes. See, even your parents can't do anything, so sit still and don't make a fuss. Amelia stood by the window, her back to him. Outside the murky glass, autumn rain drizzled, blurring the outlines of the buildings across the street. Usually, in moments like these, overwhelming terror gripped her, paralyzing her will and draining her strength. But today was different. It was as if the thin thread tying her to years of fear suddenly snapped. Not an explosion of rage, not despair, but a strange, quiet liberation. Something clicked inside, like an old, rusty lock breaking. It wasn't bravery, more like exhaustion. Exhaustion from constant fear, from lies, from humiliations. Meanwhile, her parents' car sped through the wet streets toward Daniel's house, their son and Amelia's brother. Heavy silence filled the car, broken only by Patricia's sobs. George gripped the wheel silently. His face was ashen from what he'd endured. They both felt guilty and helpless. Guilty for turning a blind eye for years, hoping it would somehow resolve itself. Helpless because they feared Marcus, feared his unpredictable fury. Patricia pulled her phone from her bag. With trembling fingers, she found the photos she'd secretly taken in Amelia's apartment. The bruise on her daughter's face, the scrapes on her arms. These images were more terrifying than any words. She handed the phone to George. "Look, George, look what he's done to her." And we did nothing. George glanced at the screen and turned away, unable to bear it. He felt a lump in his throat. All his life, he'd seen himself as a good father, a caring husband, but now he realized his silence was betrayal. "We should have done something long ago, Pat. Long ago." Arriving at Daniel's, they practically ran up to the third floor. Daniel opened the door and saw their tear-streaked faces. He understood immediately. What happened? What's wrong with Amelia? Patricia handed him the phone with the photos. Daniel took it, and as he scrolled through the images, his face darkened. He was a lawyer, accustomed to human cruelty, but seeing his own sister battered stirred a wave of rage in him. "We're not letting this go," he growled, setting the phone aside. "I'm calling the police right now." He dialed 911. Clearly and calmly, like the professional he was, he reported the domestic violence, giving the address and names involved. Then, wasting no time, he started getting ready. "I'm going there," he told his parents. "I need to make sure Amelia's okay." Daniel knew the key was to act fast and decisively. He understood how the system worked and that Marcus had every chance to evade punishment if they didn't take bold steps. He had to protect Amelia, no matter what it cost. Amelia was still by the window when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. She hesitated before answering. "Hello, Amelia, it's Daniel." She flinched at her brother's voice. "Daniel, what's wrong? I know what's going on, Amelia. Mom and Dad told me everything." "I've called the police. They're on their way to you." For a moment, she was speechless. The police. She'd always feared the police, like anything tied to violence. But Daniel's voice held such confidence and strength that her fear began to recede. Are you sure this is right?" she whispered. "Amelia, listen to me. You don't have to endure this anymore. You deserve a better life. Are you ready to get out?" Years of humiliation, fear, and despair flashed through her mind. She remembered Marcus's words, "No one needs you. No one will help you." But now, hearing her brother's voice, she knew it was a lie. Someone loved her. Someone was ready to fight for her. "Yes," she answered quietly. "Yes, I'm ready." "Good. I'll be there soon. Wait for me. And don't be afraid, I'm with you." She hung up. A storm of emotions raged inside. Fear, hope, anger. But one thing dominated. She wasn't alone anymore. She had support, she had hope, and that gave her strength. She glanced back at Marcus, who, suspecting nothing, kept watching television. His face was relaxed and content. He had no idea his world was collapsing. Amelia took a deep breath and went to the bedroom. She opened the closet and pulled out a small suitcase, planning to stay with her parents temporarily. She began packing a few dresses, photos of her parents, an old stuffed toy from her childhood. These items symbolized her past life, the life before Marcus, the life where she'd been happy. Half an hour later, the lock clicked. Marcus, lounging on the couch in front of the television, tensed. He expected anything but this. "Who'd you call now?" He snarled through gritted teeth, not taking his eyes off the screen, but anxiety crept into his voice. In the doorway stood Daniel, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and the local patrolman. Behind them, eyes downcast, was George, Amelia's father. His face was ashen, as if he'd committed the crime himself. Amelia stood aside, leaning against the wall. In her hands, she held a thin folder. The fear that had paralyzed her for years retreated, leaving icy calm. She knew this was just the beginning, but it was the start of something else, something where she had a voice. Daniel stepped forward. "Marcus Thompson?" he asked. His voice was steady and firm, like a lawyer certain of his case. Marcus turned off the television, tossing the remote on the couch. "What's this about?" he snapped, trying to keep up his bravado. But his eyes betrayed his unease. "You're under arrest for suspicion of inflicting bodily harm on Amelia Victoria," one officer began. Reading the protocol, Marcus jumped up, interrupting. "What nonsense? What arrest? She did it to herself. You really believe her?" He looked at Amelia, his gaze a mix of fury and desperation. "Amelia, what are you thinking? You know I didn't mean it. It was an accident." Amelia didn't respond. She simply handed the folder to Daniel. He took it and passed it to the officer. "Here are statements, photos, medical records of past injuries. Everything's documented," Daniel said calmly. The officer reviewed the documents carefully. The patrolman nodded to George, who approached like a mechanical puppet and confirmed his identity. Marcus paced the room like a caged animal. "You've lost your minds. On what grounds are you arresting me?" He tried to approach Amelia, but Daniel blocked him. "Don't go near her," Daniel warned. His voice was full of threat. "You'll have a chance to explain at the station." The officers grabbed Marcus by the arms. He resisted, yelling, threatening. "I'll show you! I have connections! You'll regret this!" George stood with his head bowed. He couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. He felt guilty, cowardly, worthless. He knew he should have stopped this earlier, but he'd been afraid. Afraid of Marcus, afraid of scandal, afraid of shattering the illusion of well-being. And now here he was, watching the police lead away the man he'd once considered family. Amelia watched as they took Marcus out of the apartment. There was so much malice and hatred in his eyes that she involuntarily shuddered, but this time, fear didn't grip her. She knew she had protection now. "Amelia, you need to get a medical exam," Daniel said once the police left. "Mom will go with you." Amelia nodded. Patricia, who had stood frozen like a statue until then, approached her daughter and hugged her. "Everything will be okay, sweetie," she whispered. And for the first time in ages, real warmth rang in her voice. George stood silently in the hallway, staring at the closed door. He felt out of place, unnecessary. He wanted to say something, apologize, explain, but the words stuck in his throat. Amelia and Patricia left the apartment. Daniel stayed with George. "Dad, I know it's hard for you right now," Daniel said, looking at his father's sunken face. "But the main thing now is to support Amelia. She's been through hell." George sighed. "I know, Daniel. It's my fault. I should have done something sooner." "No one's perfect," Daniel replied. "The important thing is we can fix it now. You'll be a witness at the questioning. It's crucial for Amelia." George nodded. "I will. I'll do everything I can." Amelia and Patricia rode to the hospital in a taxi. Silence filled the car, broken only by Patricia's quiet weeping. Amelia stared out the window at the passing city lights. She felt drained but also free. For the first time in years, she sensed a chance to start over. At the hospital, the doctor examined Amelia and documented all the injuries. Patricia stayed by her side, holding her hand and whispering words of support. Back at the apartment, they found Daniel already drafting a request for a protective order. George sat in the kitchen, silently sipping tea. Amelia saw her mother's hands shaking, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Mom, don't cry," Amelia said, hugging her. "Everything will be okay. We'll get through this." "I know, sweetie," Patricia replied, wiping her tears. I'm just so glad you finally decided to leave him. I always knew he was hurting you, but I was afraid to say anything. I feared it'd make things worse. I know, Mom, Amelia said, but it's over now. We'll live differently from here on. Meanwhile, George silently carried out Marcus's things from the apartment. He packed them into large black bags and took them to the landing. He did it without a word, feeling he had to do something to atone for his guilt toward his daughter. Amelia sat in her room, surrounded by her family's care. Daniel sat nearby, explaining how the court process would go. Patricia stroked her hair and whispered encouragement. George sat quietly in the kitchen, feeling guilty and useless. Amelia looked at her loved ones. She saw love, support, and hope in their eyes. She realized she wasn't alone. She had a family that loved her and would always be there. An unfamiliar silence reigned in the apartment. The television was off, not filling the space with aggressive news sounds or silly talk shows that Marcus loved so much. This silence seemed deafening to Amelia, yet soothing, as if someone had turned off the nagging, irritating background noise that had haunted her for years. Something intangible hung in the air, a new sensation. Freedom, timid, and not fully realized yet, but palpable. Patricia, trying not to make noise, went to the kitchen and put on the kettle. Her movements were unusually confident, without the nervousness and fuss Amelia was used to seeing. It seemed her mother had finally shed some heavy burden, or perhaps just shifted it onto Marcus's shoulders, but Amelia didn't care. The main thing was that now, here in this small kitchen, Patricia didn't seem like the hunted, frightened woman Amelia had known all her life. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, bent over papers. He looked up when he saw her and smiled. There was so much warmth and support in his eyes that tears welled up in Amelia again. She quickly turned away so he wouldn't see her weakness. "How are you?" Daniel asked, setting the papers aside. "Fine," Amelia murmured, sitting on the chair across from him. "It all feels like a dream. I can't believe this is really happening. This is reality, Amelia. And you made the right choice. What if I've ruined everything?" she whispered, looking at her hands on the table. "What if he comes back? What if it gets even worse?" Daniel took her hand in his, squeezing it firmly but gently. "He won't come back. I'll make sure of it. And you haven't ruined anything. On the contrary, you've saved yourself." His words sounded like a spell. For the first time in ages, Amelia felt she could believe them, that she wasn't alone, that there was someone ready to protect her. "I'm drafting the protective order now," Daniel said. "I'll get you into the emergency protection program. That means if he tries to approach you, the police will respond immediately." He explained all the details, the legal nuances, but Amelia listened as if through a haze. All those words, terms, laws seemed distant and unreal. The main thing she grasped: Daniel was doing everything possible to protect her. At that moment, George entered the room. He carried a large cardboard box stuffed with things. Amelia recognized Marcus's clothes, his shoes, the odds and ends he always scattered around. Her father silently carried the box past them and out of the room. "Where is he taking it?" Amelia asked, watching her father. "To the trash," Daniel replied. "He said he doesn't want anything in your home that reminds you of him." Amelia looked at her brother in surprise. She'd never seen her father so resolute. Usually, he avoided conflicts, stayed silent, didn't interfere. But now, he seemed like a different person, as if something had broken inside him, and he'd finally understood that silence isn't always golden. Patricia brought in a tray with cups and cookies. She set it on the table and poured the tea. "Drink, sweetie," she said, handing Amelia a cup. "You need to calm down." Amelia took the cup with trembling hands and sipped. The tea was hot and sweet, and for a moment she felt better. She looked at her mother. Worry still etched her face, but a new spark appeared in her eyes. Hope. They sat in silence, drinking tea and looking at each other. In that silence were more words than in the loudest shouts. Amelia felt something changing between them, that they were finally starting to understand one another. George returned without the box. He sat on a chair next to Daniel and silently took a cup of tea. He didn't look at Amelia, but she felt his gaze. There was so much pain and remorse in it that she felt awkward. "Dad," she began, but faltered. She didn't know what to say, how to express everything she felt. George raised his eyes to her. Tears stood in them. "Forgive me, Amelia," he said in a hoarse voice. "Forgive us for staying silent so long. We were afraid of him, afraid of the consequences, but that's no excuse. We should have protected you." Amelia was silent. She didn't know how to respond. She couldn't forgive him. Not yet, but she understood he spoke sincerely, that he truly regretted what happened. "Don't say anything," George said, seeing her confusion. "I understand. Just know, we'll always be here. We'll support you in everything." He lowered his eyes again and took a sip of tea. A heavy silence hung in the room. Amelia looked at Daniel. He sat beside their father, silently squeezing his shoulder. She felt warmth spreading through her body, the warmth of family, of support, of hope. I'm not alone now," she whispered, looking at her brother. Daniel met her gaze and smiled. "You were never alone, Amelia. We're just here for real now." His words were like balm on her wounded soul. For the first time in ages, she believed everything would be okay, that she could escape this nightmare, that she could start a new life. She looked at her mother, her father, her brother, and saw love in their eyes. Love she'd overlooked for so long. Love that, as it turned out, had always been there. Amelia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, she felt safe. She knew a long, hard road lay ahead, but she was ready for it, because now she knew she wasn't alone. She had family, she had support, she had hope. She opened her eyes and smiled. Timidly, uncertainly, but sincerely. "Thank you," she whispered, and in response, she saw 3 pairs of loving eyes full of hope and support. And in that moment, she understood that the resounding silence in this small apartment wasn't one of despair and fear. It was a silence of healing, of rebirth, of new life. And she was ready to embrace it. All right, thanks for listening.